Hello there, a very good evening and welcome to another edition of The Role of Law. Of course, it's the festive season, everybody's up and about, doing their own shopping. Of course, this time around, it's extremely challenging as, of course, we have to celebrate this festive season and do our shopping and other needs that we need to fulfill. We need to do all of that while adhering to the travel restrictions that have been imposed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, in this time where a lot of transactions are taking place, of course, consumers meet traders, the interactions are high. And to discuss on our show these matters, of course, matters concerning consumer rights here in Sri Lanka. We've got one of the best people in the business, of course, one of the most appropriate people to discuss this matter with, the former chairman of the Consumer Affairs Authority, President's Council, Anura Maddegoda. A very good evening, sir, and welcome to the show.
Good evening to you, Simon.
Sir, first things first, of course, this time we're living in the new normal. These are not normal conditions. A lot of purchases are being made online for different matters, for different materials. Also, at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw an incident where the Consumer Affairs Authority was highly praised for its actions in regulating the fixed prices that were put on certain goods, and a certain online trader was also raided for this matter. It was caught on camera and it gained a lot of popularity, and the Consumer Affairs Authority was praised for that. So on that point, are Sri Lankan consumers actually protected when they make purchases online?
To respond to your query, certainly the Consumer Affairs Authority Act, the provisions of the Act have to be taken into account, and in the new norm with the COVID pandemic, yes, large numbers of consumers make their purchases online for obvious reasons, for good reason. And when you make purchases online, I mean, I myself do a few purchases online. When you make purchases online, your question is whether the consumer who makes that purchase is given sufficient legal protection in terms of the Act. Now, when you look at examine the provisions of the Act, I must say that our Act falls far short of universal legal standards in that respect.
In the area of consumer rights?
Consumer rights as regards in the digital era, when it comes to consumer protection, when it comes to purchases, online purchases. That is where we fall far below other jurisdictions, other legislation in other parts of the world. We have a very fairly effective consumer affairs authority, consumer protection regime, I must say. So, in that respect, now the present Consumer Affairs Authority Act was enacted in 2003, as you well know.
Right.
It was enacted to replace the Consumer Protection Act. Then there was what was known as the Fair Trading Commission Act, and also the Control of Prices Act. So, all three of those statutes, some of them dating 30, 40 years back, were repealed and the Consumer Affairs Authority Act was brought in. So to directly answer the point that you raised, whether there is protection afforded to online purchasers, certainly I must say that our statute has a long way to go in order to provide the protection that is universally recognized as being given to on purchasers who make their purchases online.
So, for the benefit of our viewers, just so that they can understand this better, say for example, I order, say, a cell phone online, and the cell phone that was sent to me did not match the specifications. I ordered for a cell phone with good specs, but I get one with low specs. I don't have any redress.
I suppose your first redress is first point of contact then will be the seller or the company.
Right.
If it's whatever the cell phone is concerned, you first have to go back to the company or the seller and say, this certainly is not what I ordered online, and then that is your first point of contact. Now, with regard to cell phones, I must tell you, I had an experience when I was chairman, where probably more than one, where people had purchased cell phones, mobile phones, though not online, but they had made the purchases. There were defects in those cell phones,
Right.
and they went back to the trader, to the manufacturer's agent who is here, to the trader, the seller. But then they found that there was no compromise, there was no kind of redress that was given to them. Then there were complaints that were made to the authority, and we did conduct inquiries. I have myself chaired some of those panels of inquiry. I've had the practice of having panels of inquiry either chaired by me as chairman or other members of my board of directors. And we've covered a lot of ground in that area. We've given a lot of redress to consumers who've complained to us. And in that process, what happens is when a consumer who is aggrieved or who finds that he has been cheated in the process of purchasing goods and makes the initial interventions with the trader and finds that there is no way that the trader is giving in or is prepared to compromise, they can make a complaint either orally or in writing. We have a hotline that the Consumer Affairs Authority has in all 3 languages. And with that, there is a kind of investigation process that is conducted. In that investigation process, we follow the rules of natural justice. We have both sides.
Right.
First, the complainant, see what his complaint is, the grouse, the complaint he has, see whether there is merit in that complaint. I mean, any old complaint cannot be entertained. So, if there is any merit in that complaint, thereafter that complaint is looked into by our investigators. We had a panel of lawyers and others who are investigators who were investigating. This was in the legal division of the Consumer Affairs Authority. And after the initial investigations, at an inquiry level conducted by the legal officers, attempts are made to resolve the dispute.
Right.
If the legal officers fail to resolve that, then it's referred to a panel of inquiry at a higher level. And that is the level at which I as chairman or the other members of the directorate would get involved. So I must say our legal division was very efficient. We had a very good legal division, and they conducted those inquiries. The initial inquiries were very well conducted. Minutes are made of those. And we keep a record of those proceedings. And thereafter, upon non-resolution, at the initial level, it goes up to the second tier, as you, if I may say so, at the level of the chairman or the board of directors conducting inquiries.
Right. So, speaking a bit about, you spoke about the procedure that is followed at the Consumer Affairs Authority, but for the benefit of our viewers, there might be certain disgruntled consumers not happy with the products that they have purchased, especially during this festive season, because things are happening so haphazardly. The deliveries are being done in quick time because of the travel restrictions that have been imposed in the country. How can they really lodge a complaint at the Consumer Affairs Authority?
The complaint process is not difficult. It's not complicated. You can make a complaint, as I told you. We have a hotline in all 3 languages.
Right.
English, Tamil and Sinhala.
Right.
And upon the complaint being made, the inquiring officers will invite the person who makes the complaint to attend the authority office. There are the initial steps that are taken to take down the complaint, and thereafter the merits of the complaint are looked into. And if the legal officers or the inquiring officers consider that there is merit in the complaint, then you move it forward. So the inquiry, the complaint can be made in writing. Complaint can be made directly to the chairman over the telephone. I would refer it to the inquiry division. There are complaints that I received as chairman where consumers would directly complain to me. And so that process is what we followed. And at that level, once the complaint is considered to be of merit, as I said before, the respondent, so to speak, or the provider of the service, the manufacturer of the goods, or the trader is invited to attend the inquiry. Both sides are heard. In fact, legal representation is permitted. There are lawyers who attend these inquiries.
Right.
Lawyers represent traders, manufacturers. Lawyers do come with complainants. And it's a full-blown inquiry.
Right.
So therefore, then that's done in order to also maintain transparency. To ensure transparency, to make sure that there are rules of natural justice are followed. And you can also support yourself with whatever documentary proof you have, whatever witnesses you have. And the inquiring officer at that point in time will examine all that and take his best efforts to try to resolve the matter. There are times, I must say, by and large, inquiring officers have succeeded in resolving those issues. It is upon when they fail to do that, that the matters are referred to the chairman or and the directorate.
Right. In which case you will file legal action against.
No. Then thereafter, just to go further,
right.
When there is a non-resolution, so to speak, the inquiry panel comprising myself and other directors or directors themselves, we would at least have 3, not less than 3, depending on the complexity of the inquiry. There are times we've had 5 panelists chaired by me. The inquiry is conducted. Again, the parties are summoned before the inquiry panel. They can attend with lawyers, which they do. There is evidence that is presented. Submissions are made. And thereafter, the panel would make a decision. And even at that level, I, as chairman, and also I must say my other directors, would always endeavor to bring about a resolution. We would always speak to the respondent concerned and try to resolve the matter amicably between the parties. Upon failure to do that, there is a certificate that is filed in the courts.
Right.
Then the matter goes to court. And then the magistrate assumes jurisdiction. Magistrate of the area assumes jurisdiction. And it is then, of course, it becomes a judicial process. So before that, it's more a quasi-judicial process, if I say it that way. Because, and we make sure that we give all the parties the opportunity to present their cases before the authority. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, initially we were speaking about goods. We spoke about cell phones and items like that. But does the Consumer Affairs Authority Act afford protection to consumers in relation to services?
The Act itself speaks of goods and services. Provision is made to regulate both goods and services.
Right.
The main objective of the Act is to provide the right balance between the consumer on the one hand and the manufacturer or trader on the other. As the authority, we have to strike the right balance. We strike the right balance, safeguarding the interests of the consumer. So, the statute covers both the provision of goods and services. But unfortunately, we have provided, with regard to services as well, there have been inquiries. We've conducted inquiries. I remember once there was an instance where a company that provided tractors to farmers in the north central province. There were large numbers of farmers who were protesting about the quality of the tractors. Then there are inquiries, I remember, about quality of tires that were provided. There were also inquiries with regard to quality of vehicles, I must say,
Right.
that were provided by traders. So those inquiries of that magnitude have also been held by the authority during my time, I must say. And I believe even before me, and maybe being conducted at the present time. So services are covered, certainly. I remember during my time, the board, members of the board resolved that we should also venture into areas of health and medical services. We want to regulate that.
Right.
Because services are provided. And also, there were also issues raised with regard to professional legal services. But after my term of office, we couldn't get to that point during my term of office.
There are other separate bodies, regulatory bodies, regulating those services.
Yes, there are. Certainly, with all those services, there are regulatory bodies. With regard to medical services, there is the Sri Lanka Medical Council, medical associations, the GMO. There are, with regard to legal services are a self-regulated body. The Bar Association does not lay down regulations. You are required to comply with the regulations that have been enacted by the Council of Legal Education.
Right.
All lawyers are required to comply with those regulations. They are enacted as they are also adopted as rules of the Supreme Court. The failure to comply with those rules, as far as a lawyer is concerned, being a lawyer, can result in disciplinary inquiry and also can result in disenrollment. You can be suspended from practice. You can be your name can be taken off the roll of lawyers. So for that reason, within those spheres of activity, there are their own regulatory bodies which will regulate the conduct. So, but still we wanted to see whether we could find ways and means of providing relief to the consumer by regulating those areas of activity. But then I ceased to hold office in 2019, and then I do not know what the present state of matters is as far as those services are concerned.
Of course, not to cast any aspersions on the role of the Consumer Affairs Authority, but there is a slight bit of an opinion among the general public, if I may say so in Sinhala language. They say, "Podi malu vitarai allanne, loku malu allande yanne." Is there any truth to this matter?
I know people say that, but I do not say. I don't think, as far as the authority is concerned, there is any difference between a podi malu or a loku malu. As far as I was concerned, we never looked at it from that point of view. As I told you, we looked at loku malu when we went into car companies which were providing services. We went into tire manufacturing companies providing services.
Right.
So I don't think there's any truth, but that is, I believe, the public perception is that only the small-time boutique owner is the one who is kind of brought under the purview of that. So public perception is that, but I do not think there is any truth or any justification for that public perception.
You were speaking about reforms, of course, the possible reforms, and you said at the beginning that the Consumer Affairs Authority Act here in Sri Lanka does not suit the current times, the digital age. How so, and why so?
Well, I think Parliament needs to examine these matters. The government of the day should examine the scope of the Act, make sure that the Act, particularly in the present day, when there is a lot of online transactions being made. Now, even the courts recognize online transactions today. There is evidence that is taken in, with video conferencing.
Right.
So we have advanced in that respect. So the law also must be, with regard to consumer affairs also. It is very essential that we widen the scope of the law to make sure that the digitalized era is also covered. That is because we do not have any provision in the law with regard to digital transactions as far as this Act is concerned. That doesn't provide for that.
Right.
So for that reason, there is market manipulation, there is restrictive trade practices, all those areas are covered. But then as far as digital transactions are concerned, I must say the law needs to be completely revamped, and also we must examine other statutes in the region,
Right.
particularly in this region, to make sure that we are on par with some of the other advanced statutes with regard to consumer protection. In fact, we wanted to have a dialogue with the World Trade Organization, which we initiated at that time.
Right.
But then I believe that is still going on. So that was also done with that objective. We have also, I must also say, there is also, when there are disputes, there is also what is called the Consumer Affairs Council, the Consumer Council. So that is also, there are disputes with regard to restrictive trade practices can be referred to the council for resolution. So there are certainly good features which are, I must say, consumer-oriented features which are contained in the Act.
Right.
But at the same time, the Act can be vastly improved. We can make further progress in this area and make sure that consumer rights are further protected and advance in that direction.
Speaking of consumers' ability to, of course, access redress by way of a complaint to the Consumer Affairs Authority, you said that once a complaint is lodged, you hear both parties. Does the Consumer Affairs only hear these matters in Colombo? So a person in Jaffna once made a complaint has to come to Colombo, or do you all have substations located across the island?
We do have regional officers.
Right.
Initial inquiries are done, can be done, and are done at the regional inquiry, at the regional officers. In fact, as chairman, I had a program to visit all the regional officers.
Right.
I couldn't do all that, but I visited some regional officers. In fact, we have a fairly large regional office in Jaffna. There's a big presence in the Eastern Province. So there are, in all the provinces we do have, in the Western Province, the Gampaha district and the Kalutara district all over. But as far as inquiries are concerned, where the panel of inquiry comprising the chairman and the board, yes, that is held in Colombo. And in fact, the traders, I told you about the farmers, I mean, they had to come all the way from Anuradhapura and Polonnaruwa to Colombo.
Right.
Not on one occasion, on many occasions,
Right.
to attend those inquiries. I could see the hardships that they had to undergo. Doing far better had we, had the provision to conduct those inquiries in the provinces, but unfortunately that could not be done. So we had to invite the traders to come over to Colombo. There were traders, I remember there were complainants from the Hambantota area who complained about the quality of fertilizer.
Right.
So like that, all those inquiries were centrally conducted in the head office in Colombo. And I think it is time that we should kind of venture into the provinces to conduct those inquiries to make it easier for the complainants so that the inquiries can be conducted in their own areas in the provinces.
Sir, you mentioned about the shortcomings in the Act as far as its compliance to the digital age goes. But besides that, how more can consumer rights here in Sri Lanka be protected as far as amending the Act is concerned?
The Sri Lankan consumer rights, I mean the Consumer Affairs Authority, as I said, I think I said this before, the objective is to strike the right balance. You have to protect the consumer, safeguard the consumer, and give him adequate protection. At the same time, you cannot destroy the trade or the manufacturer. So that is where you have to have the right balance. Now, with regard to activities that fall within the ambit of the authority, yes, we have always endeavored to strike that balance. Other areas, as far as the consumer is concerned, there are other regulatory bodies that will regulate those areas. Now, if you take the Public Utilities Commission Act, now that regulates certain areas of activity, where the Consumer Affairs Authority cannot step on the toes of the Public Utilities Commission.
Right.
So those regulatory bodies are there, they should become effective. I mean, they must have, our authorities must have a very proactive stance. We must have a proactive attitude towards these matters. So what happens is, we are reactive. We only react to a situation. rather than being proactive.
Right.
I think in Sri Lanka, most authorities, I would say, are reactive.
Right.
They react to a situation that arises rather than taking the lead to be proactive in these areas. So that is where I think consumer rights, as far as protection of those consumer rights are concerned, the various statutory bodies can also help the consumer, can safeguard the consumer, can protect the consumer by a more proactive approach to their activities.
Sir, also as far as the consumer rights reforms that you spoke of here in Sri Lanka, you spoke of plans to reform the Act, to amend the Act. Do you see these happening in the near future? Are we a long way from it?
I believe so. We have a new government in place, elected last year, and I believe the government has a mandate.
Strong mandate.
A very strong mandate, which can push through legislation in Parliament very easily. So these are matters that should come within the purview of the Law Commission, the respective ministries. The Consumer Affairs Authority comes within the purview of the Ministry of Trade. The Law Commission can examine all that is the mandate of the Law Commission, to examine what laws need to be amended, require amendment, require changes. The Law Commission can examine these matters, can review this legislation, and also make changes to government. And thereafter, I believe the cabinet, the process of enacting legislation can take place. As far as the will of the government, I believe the government has the mandate to do that. That was the people's will. I mean, people have granted the government an overwhelming mandate, the present government, to work towards its welfare, the people's own welfare. That is what the people were looking at the last elections.
And the development of the nation.
And precisely so. So, to that extent, I think with that mandate that the government has, I'm sure the government ought to proceed with amending legislation for the betterment of the consumer and the general public.
So we're in the final few minutes of the show. My last question to you: Sri Lanka is slated to be a hub, service hub, a hub of the Indian Ocean. And in this region, that's kind of our goal. It's the development we're looking forward to. How do you see the amendments to, of course, the protection of consumers in Sri Lanka supporting this or adding value to this goal?
I mean, that will add great value if we can do that. If we do that, where now Sri Lanka is now being projected as the hub, you know, as a central hub of this entire area. So if we have a legislation, even before, if we can now aim at legislation and aim towards that hub, and also provide the also enact amending legislation, that will be a great boon to the consumer, not only to the consumers, but to all the people of this country. Because once we become the hub, Sri Lanka is also inviting foreign investors into this country. There is the harbour project that has come on, where the land has been, the sea has been reclaimed, and there is going to be the new Port of Colombo, the new city of Colombo. So with that, and with the foreign investment that is being envisaged to come into the new port at the city of Colombo, the legislation that should be, it is very important that legislation is brought in, absolutely critically important to bring in legislation expeditiously, to make sure that when such investments are made in this country, when multinational companies invest in this country, that people of this country and also others have the benefit of legislation which will protect their rights while safeguarding the interests of companies that come to trade, to do business in this country.
Well, thank you very much, sir, for joining us on our show and educating, of course, the general public on their rights, the rights of the consumers, especially in this run-up to the festive season, the Christmas season. Thank you very much, sir, once again for joining us on our show, taking time off your busy schedule.
Thank you very much for inviting me for this show.
And a big thank you to all our viewers out there for tuning in to The Role of Law. We will see you again, same time, same place, next week. Until then, take care and God bless.